Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you, Jersey First TV and the Nader Narrative, bringing you an important subject tonight about what New Jersey schools are teaching your children. So please listen to this and take notes and think about what you need to do to act. I want to welcome to the program, first of all, Reverend Gregory Quinlan, the president of the Center for Garden State Families. I'm going to call you Greg moving forward since I can't seem to pronounce that correctly. And Dana Leonard as well, who lives in Kinnelon, and she not only being a very intelligent scientist, and I know you're known for your data, but also a concerned parent. So let's get into this, guys. I'm going to start with you, Greg. You represent an incredible organization, the Center for Garden State Families. I want to read your mission because that's an important reason why you're here weighing in on this topic today. The mission of the Center for Garden State Families is to protect and promote faith, freedom, and the natural family in culture and public policy as held by the traditional Christian worldview. So, Greg, bring us all up to speed on what happened with the New Jersey school curriculum during 2020 when new standards were passed by the NJ State Department of Education. Please bring us up to speed on what was passed.
Well, there have been a lot of things that are being passed, and most of this was lobbied. Everybody needs to know this. This was lobbied for by First Lady Tammy Murphy. And what happened in 2020 was the inclusion of anal sex into the sex ed curriculum for 8th graders. But also what was going on too, right immediately after that, was the introduction of masturbation to 5th grade. So the question becomes, those are the mandated standards to be taught to minor children whose brains are still being formed without the consent or permission of a parent. But at the end of 5th grade, masturbation, and then we ask, how are you teaching that? And we've heard everything from cartoon instruction manuals, which is pornography. There is an obscenity law in New Jersey that does exist. It was passed in 2009, but we're being told by friends of mine who are prosecutors here in New Jersey that education establishments would be exempt.
Oh my. Yeah.
But that doesn't exempt them from federal laws, and there are lots of them, and we've got attorneys looking at it right now. I'm waiting on some feedback from some other attorneys to see what we can do there. But this is the curriculum that has been passed. But people need to know, too, for the first time in memory, everything usually is, just pro facie, it's rubber stamped, because here in New Jersey, we have a dictator for governor because the Constitution makes him a dictator.
Well, let's stop there for a second, Greg, because I think the obvious question from people watching is, when you say this got passed at the State Board of Education level, why weren't the citizens heard? How do they have the power to tell us what our kids will learn? Why wasn't this at the legislative level? Can you educate us on that?
Well, again, the state constitution, we have the most powerful governor of all 50 states. And according to the Constitution, he appoints everything from the school board to the attorney general to the secretary of state, on down. Other states, the attorney general is voted for. The state school board is voted for, just like your local school boards. But in New Jersey, we vote for the governor, and that means that the governor is the premier, the prime minister of everything. It's almost like a parliamentary type government. So, the legislature didn't know about it, even though we have education committees in the legislature, but we also have a Democrat-controlled legislature with a Democrat governor, which means that everything is just rubber stamped and approved of. But for the first time ever, Elizabeth, the 4 members of the state school board voted against the anal sex curriculum because, for one, I think they finally actually read it.
Right.
And so when they saw this, they couldn't believe it. And so this was the first time ever, and that shocked and surprised everyone. But I've noticed people on the far left and people on the far right and those in the middle are very objectionable to this material because it is harmful to minors. It is exploitive and sexually instructive. And what we're now teaching, and what's happening, of course, now in Kinnelon, is the advancement of the transgender movement and transgenderism, which is the real problem here because even according to the highly politicized American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association, it remains a dysphoria. And many that I know, because I'm a retired nurse, I've been in the health field for a long, long time. I know I look 33, but I'm really 63. So I've been in this a long time, and they object. to what the APAs have been saying, what they've been doing, that this should still continue to be a mental illness. It is a disorder, and it is, and normalizing this behavior that is so destructive, physically altering your body, physically abusing it with chemicals and hormones, is nothing more than child abuse. And allowing a child to do that without the consent of the parent is another problem, because that was done under the Christie administration.
Yeah, right. So I have a lot of questions for you about that, and I want you to share with people not only who's been behind this, but also the impact to society. But I want to shift to Dana for a moment. Dana lives in Kinnelon. She's a very active, involved parent. So Greg mentioned that suddenly an issue arose about 2 weeks ago in Kinnelon. And as I understand it, you were promised the parents there that this new curriculum would be adopted in a subtle way, that we were looking at a September rollout. Yes. Tell us what ended up happening to cause this massive reaction from the parents.
So in Kinnelon, and I was familiar with this passing of the bill in 2020, and I did reach out to the director of curriculum in the town, who communicated this new curriculum would not be implemented until September 2022. However, a recent program in the middle school, which was actually presented in social studies class, and that's one of the things that we're seeing in several towns across the state. These topics are being woven into several course areas under the guise of whether it be social studies or science or writing. And so in Kinnelon recently, the middle schoolers who are 6th through 8th grade, so 11 years old to 14 years old, were presented a class in social studies centered around a transgender activist, a person. They saw a short film based on some of his struggles. There were clips from, it's Aidan Dowling is the person's name, who's made this film, 10 Years on Testosterone. So they were shown some clips, went through some transgender vocabulary, some terminology such as non-binary and binary and things like that. This was done without parental notification or parental consent. And it took a few days, I think, for parents to start communicating, because they were getting questions from their children. And, you know, through the course of discussing with other parents in town, communication with the school district, the board members weren't aware of this, you know, of this program. It was basically done in preparation for an assembly that would later be held for the school. And there was a notification that went out later with some of this information that had been already taught, with an option then to opt out of the assembly. But the communication process, the lack of transparency around this really fueled a lot of discussion, and parents were angry. Additionally, it became, you know, sort of discovered that there had been a previous assembly, similar situation without any advanced notification for parents to prepare their children or to follow up with their children or opt out. This previous assembly was presented by a lawyer, and it was based on a case, a very sad legal case, where a gay man was bullied and later committed suicide. So this is a very tragic situation. And I think parents sort of understanding what's happening in the school, not technically in the course curriculum, but these programs that are being presented to middle school children, are concerned that these are not being transparent, that the parents aren't being notified of this very heavy subject area.
Right. You didn't get a chance to really opt out. And from what I read, a lot of people were unaware, even in the administration of the school, that this was happening. And I have to ask you, Greg, you know, the way Dana describes some of these things that have been presented, often in the name of diversity, inclusion, and all of those equality, all those words that are used, we seem to be presenting options to children that maybe aren't appropriate for them in the guise of trying to be compassionate. I mean, where is the line here, you know, as compassionate people, right, who want to help those who are suffering from disorders, as you describe, versus providing information to children that they never even knew existed and almost presenting it as though this is a choice? Where's that line?
That's a lot right there, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Yeah.
First of all, for people who are compassionate, truly caring, and truly loving of an individual that's struggling with something, you don't enable it.
Mm.
And what we are doing here is we are enabling a life-threatening, life-changing disorder. And that's exactly what it is. Because we have to go down to the nitty-gritty here, right down to the chromosomal level. No matter how many body parts you remove or add on, and no matter how much hormones you take, you do not change your chromosomal makeup. You remain XX or XY. You remain what you are assigned at birth. The language they use, they play with the language.
Right.
And as a Christian organization, that takes me all the way back to the garden. Sounds like a serpent. We play with the language. And this is the real key here. How are we compassionate? We don't enable a behavior that is destructive and self-destructive. And we certainly don't impose it upon children who can't make up their minds, who don't have the ability for rational and logical thought. And we're doing it at such an early age, even as fifth grade. This is the problem. This is the real issue. You know, in our frontal lobe, there is the area of reasoning, or risk aversion. It's not fully formed until you're 25.
Right.
All right. And in fact, I've met some adults. I don't think it's formed yet. But the point is that all things considered, this is not what we should be doing ethically or morally. There is such a thing as morals and moral law and ethics toward children, and how we're treating our children says everything about our nation and about where we're at. We have enabled and allowed this to come into our schools, to creep into our society, and we have to stop it. And the bottom line is this too.
Yes.
The American Psychiatric Association said this in May 2000. It has not been changed. It has not been amended, and it has not been removed from their website. There are no replicated scientific studies supporting any specific biologic etiology for homosexuality or anything else.
Wow.
It still remains, man and woman, heterosexuality is the norm, period. Just a year, it'll be 3 years this August, we had a study done, the largest ever genome study I've ever heard of. I'm a nurse, I'm not a scientist, but I'm a nurse with a lot of science background. And I've never heard of a study using 44,000. Now that's a big sampling there. 44,000 human genomes on 3 continents and 4 universities, and many of the scientists and researchers that were part of this study identified as LGBTQ.
Wow.
At the end of the study, this is what they concluded, and the headlines were all over the place, including the LA Times, and said this, quote, "There is no single gay gene." End quote. This is the point. What we're doing now has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with logic. It has everything to do with a political movement that is truly a religion, a faith-based assumption.
So if this political movement can get into the school system, obviously they're trying to change what the generations are learning. Dana, as a parent, aren't these kitchen table issues your decision of when, how, in what way, what age, to talk about this with your children? Now you've been forced to address this, yet they got the information before you even knew it. So how do you as a parent counter this?
Absolutely. These are family discussions, in my opinion. I believe that as a parent, we have the right to introduce at whatever age we decide appropriate, the amount and the specific detail of content for our children. And we know even among our own children raised in the same home at different ages, they have different levels of maturity and the ability to, to process some of this information. And so just to sort of also add to your point earlier around the school discussion, Greg, we know that this wasn't presented as in our situation here in town as an academic subject or an academic discussion. One viewpoint was presented. There was no discussion of people who have detransitioned, right. Which is a significant, conversation piece to have when talking about this. And so these, they couldn't necessarily go from different angles of this topic because there are so many and they are so difficult to comprehend even for adults. And so these children, it's clear that it's just age inappropriate to be presenting this type of information. Knowing this curriculum was coming, we actually removed our older children from the public school system, but I do still have one in addition to the way that COVID was handled in the schools and the missed schooling that a lot of the public schools, were subjected to based on their policies versus how the private schools handle those. But I remain involved in the system because I just think that as I've had these conversations starting a year and a half ago with parents, there are many who feel blindsided by this because you don't see articles written on the curriculum. Breitbart published one, I think in June 2020, but there aren't discussions being had with school boards. And they really do, I believe from what I've read, have the authority to make some modifications to the specific learning objectives. And so parents, really need to have difficult conversations because this is it's an uncomfortable subject for us to all to talk about, but they need to have those conversations with their school boards because the teachers will be having them with your children.
Right. And
some of these learning objectives that, when I send them in writing to parents cited from the New Jersey State Department of Education, we have, as Greg mentioned, 5th grade, some of them in 8th grade, really for people who raise their children in Christian and other faith-based households, they will be teaching about pregnancy options such as abortion to 7th and 8th graders who are children, 13 and 14 years old themselves. They will be defining vaginal, oral, and anal sex. These are things that are difficult for me to speak about as an adult, but realizing that in middle school, these children will be, having these conversations. It just gives me the strength to have these. And I appreciate you bringing awareness to this subject to both of you.
Well, we have to continue to bring awareness to it. And I know Greg is committed to that, but you bring up a good point, Dana. And Greg, you started this conversation listing some of those things, starting in kindergarten and an agenda that goes all the way really to 12th grade. We're not just talking about gender dysphoria. We're not just talking about transgenderism and teaching all of those things, but we're talking about just a laundry list of pretty disturbing things. What is the agenda behind this? And I can make my own guesses, but I want you to talk about the bigger agenda here and some of these groups that are involved that had direct access to influence what this curriculum looks like. What's their bigger agenda?
There is a huge agenda by it, and we do an entire seminar, symposium on this. We have our hour-and-a-half talk, which is like 3 days crammed into one. So it's and I can talk pretty fast, but that's really fast. Yeah. So we try to get in as much information as we can. I used to be a part of that movement, the LGBTQ movement. I was with the Human Rights Campaign Fund, as it was called then. I was there because of the AIDS epidemic. I was an AIDS nurse. I watched 100 of my friends and acquaintances die of AIDS before I quit counting. So I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, know how it is. But this agenda has been going on really, literally for as long as I've been alive. And I think I'm the oldest person on the call. So be grateful, ladies. I'm the oldest one on the call. Right. So the point is that this has been going on for a long time to liberate. We talk about this from the father of modern education, whose name escapes me right now. Anyway, he said that we have to erase the church and the neighborhood. Yeah. And that's it in a nutshell. So what we do is we use great language, like what Diane De Giuseppe, the superintendent of schools there in Kinnelon, said. This is resilience. We were giving an example of resilience. Wow. Resilience to what? Denying your own biology, changing your mind. This woman pretending to be a man who's married to a woman has a baby. Now, we know they didn't biologically make a baby. So where did the baby come from? Part of the curriculum we're talking about talks about options to pregnancy. And one of those is surrogacy. Mm. Surrogacy is renting a womb. Right. So are we teaching our children to rent out their womb? Are we teaching our little girls that their womb can be rented out for $60,000 a pregnancy? And remember, New Jersey had a huge case, the Baby M case years ago, all about this issue and about this subject, because it's the position of the Center for Guardian State Families. We oppose surrogacy, except in certain circumstances, it has to be within the family unit, not outside the family unit. There's so many things here where we have morally jumped the broom into things we're not ready for, we're not mentally equipped for, and frankly, we weren't created or designed to do.
It's pretty frightening. Yeah, when you list that all, and I recommend that people go to your website and read your article about it. And there's a lot out there, but it's pretty disturbing when we see the agenda being pushed forward. And isn't it really just trying to blow up the nuclear family? And isn't that what we've seen in the past? Really, it's been a while, but the past 2 years really has focused on ultimately destroying the nuclear family. If we can take parents out of the equation, and those parents that have gotten frustrated and have gone to private school, it's understandable. But sadly, we leave behind kids who may not have the protection they need, and parents who don't have time, busy trying to make two incomes, busy trying to meet all the demands of the modern society we've created. And all of a sudden, their child is being raised by an institution that does not look favorably on the family. Greg, if we can get back the nuclear family and heal that, isn't that a big step forward for us?
That's our mission, is to bring the family back. By the way, the family is in the way. Remember the quote I made? Horace Mann? Was it Horace Mann? Or the other one? Dewey. Dewey's the one that said that. Dewey's the one that said that.
Yeah.
It's that erasing the neighborhood, erasing the nuclear family, erasing God. So, and that's our problem. You see, our entire society is based on the real neighborhood, which is the family and the extended family, you know, and the redundancy in the family that God made in creation. Right. So if we erase that, then the government takes over as parent. And that's communism. That's Marxism. This is the agenda. And our children are the pawns. They're the tools in which they change exactly who we are, the character of who we are, and the health of who we are. And we've allowed this to happen for most of my lifetime. And so since it's taken 60 plus years for it to take place, how long will it take us to get it back? Probably after I'm gone. But in either case, that doesn't mean we stop. We have to fight on for the future of our children and for their mental, emotional, and physical health, because this is assault on all three.
Yes, it is. It's a very good point. And we all have to lean in, whether we have school-age children or not, because this is the world we will be living in. That's going to be created by this generation that will be in power at some point. So Dana, obviously you're in the thick of it at Kinnelon. This is just beginning though. I mean, this is one part of a curriculum that's being rolled out. I predict that we're going to see a lot of pretty tough Board of Education meetings in the next few months and definitely into the fall as parents start to realize what really is going to be taught to their children. Dana, we appreciate you being involved and committed to that. What's the next step? There's a meeting coming up here as this interview will play. It'll actually be this evening on March 24th. Do you expect a pretty big crowd for that meeting?
I do. I've been contacted by several people who I normally am not in communication with around questions and concerns. So we do have a meeting at 7 at the high school. And I have encouraged people to come to speak and to listen, just to have the conversation and to show the board that we support them in hopefully using their, you know, you talked about the moral discussion. And sadly, I'm not on Facebook, but I have been shared some streams. There has been this leaning on, I can say, you know, some of the people affiliated with the school district who have authority and you know, powers have said the case for this new curriculum. Well, the children see it on Zoom, rather on TikTok or on YouTube. And you know, people can always opt out. And I feel like, you know, we need the adults with integrity to really lead and to protect the kids because of what they do see on TikTok, if they are on TikTok and on YouTube. We need the moral compass to be set by people who can protect them rather than really cave to what's happening on things like social media and from the state. This is another order from the state of New Jersey. And we really need to consider when these orders affect our children directly. You know, Governor Murphy and his Department of Education really sold Planned Parenthood access. They worked in conjunction with our Department of Education and Planned Parenthood. They sold access to our children. And so it should really, you know, hopefully wake people up to having those really difficult conversations. So that's my hope, is that the next few school board meetings, we have a better showing than the normal ones.
Well, and the hope is we see this across the state and really across the nation, right? But this is about stripping parental rights. And, you know, Greg, we are waking up a little bit late. We gave the public school system over to the left. and never imagined it would get to this point, but we're waking up. And that's the good news. But it's going to be a fight to wrestle back the future for our children, to reestablish our rights as parents and really as citizens. And as Dana says, you know, you can say these kids can have access to all of this, but that's just giving into the moral decline. It's incredibly important that we all stand up for the kind of culture we want to see in 20 years. You don't get somewhere just little, you know, overnight. You get somewhere little by little. So as a final close, Greg, will you please give people your website and also just give them a word of encouragement that you've been able to make change in this state, that if we all keep fighting, we can actually turn this around?
We've stopped a lot of things. We've actually stopped a lot of things, prevented a lot of things, made a lot of pushback. We've gained some seats in the Assembly and in the Senate. Folks, nothing changes unless you work at it, and you have to work at it. Something that Dana said too is very important. She said the chance to opt out. They weren't given the chance to opt out.
That's
It was done to them without their knowledge, without their consent. This was absolutely raping the minds of their children. So the Center for Garden State Families is www.gardenstatefamilies, plural, gardenstatefamilies.org. And you can contact us at info@gardenstatefamilies.org.
And I would recommend for those watching, you need to support organizations like Greg's, because they are on the front lines of this. They're watching for you. You know, we're all living our lives and, you know, hoping we don't have to get involved and fight, but we do. But organizations like yours, you know, are really on the wall watching for us and saying, hey guys, something's going on you need to pay attention to. So thank you for the wins that you've had. I do think things are changing. I know there's a parental rights bill that is coming up. So we will continue as parents and really just good citizens and as moral people to fight for the kind of future that we want. Dana, I thank you for doing what you're doing. We'll get back to this issue. We'll be watching Kinnelon and other places in the state as we grapple with what Governor Murphy has put upon our children. And Greg, thank you for everything that you do.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
And to
God
my
bless
audience,
you both. Thank you.
Absolutely.